12. Perhaps it was the 18 months of intensive training put in by Presley and Bob Neal, or perhaps it was the instant magic wrought by the all-knowing Colonel Tom Parker. In any case, 1956 was the year, says Red West, when everything took off. Everything he touched turned to gold. He couldn't do a thing wrong. It was the year Colonel Tom was going to prove his boast that he would have New York begging for Elvis Presley. If ever a town and its critics, who took a special delight in lambasting Presley, were going to eat their words, it was going to be New York, and all the fancy pants scribes. Ed Sullivan, a beloved veteran of the early days of television show business, would not be exempt. Taking his cue from the New York Times, the Journal, American, and the Daily News, he had said loud and clear that he would rather run a 60-minute test pattern than put on Elvis Presley. Even in those early days of TV, the rating wars were just as hysterical as they are today. One of the shows that was suffering was Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey's stage show, broadcast from the CBS Theater in Midtown Manhattan. It was produced by Jackie Gleason and served as a lead into Gleason's own show, The Honey Mooners. The Dorsey show played opposite the Perry Como show, whose ratings seemed impregnable. Colonel Tom bombarded Gleason and his talent scouts with an impressive list of figures from auditoriums all over the country, bulldozing a reluctant Gleason into finally giving the kid a chance on an important nationally televised talent show. Gleason was not really among the converted. He had gone on record as saying that he didn't think Presley's performance was the kind that would last. But, he added, if I booked only the shows I liked, I'd have nothing but trumpet players on the show. It was a snow-choked Saturday night in January 1956, when Colonel Tom led his caravan of Presley, Scotty Moore, Bill Black, D.J. Fontana, and Red West into the CBS Theater. All the boys were apprehensive. This was a do-or-die effort. The Colonel had got them an unprecedented $1,200 a show for 6 performances. That was fine, but the national exposure was going to either give them birth or execute them on the spot. Forever. The CBS studio itself didn't offer any reassurance. It was only half full. The stage was set. The group at their instruments. Presley, dressed in an off-white sport jacket with giant draped shoulders that made him look like a contender for a Mr. America title, pounced onto center stage with the agility of a jaguar that had been caged too long. He grabbed the mic, raked it across his body, threw his legs arrogantly apart and hunched his shoulders. His full lips formed a sneer. He gave that uncanny impression he still gives today. Threat mixed with poise, half street fighter, half ballet dancer. The lights shining off his patent leather hair created an aureole effect around him. And then he unleashed the hurricane. His opening number was Heartbreak Hotel. Here was this half saint, half sinner crying out for sympathy, yet mixed with his pleas was the threat that the animal inside him could hardly be controlled. The legs quivered, the waist and pelvis did a whole 360-degree swivel, whose completion was marked by D.J. Fontana's banging drums, with Presley then flinging out his in unison. The face would contort in agony, and then the left-sided sneer would tell his women that and then the groin would do its circle and D.J. would hit that drum again, and it happened again. In a decade that yawns at Calcutta and Deep Throat, it should be remembered that this was going out on national television into millions of American homes at a time when the hottest thing on film was Doris Day, and Hollywood sets were only just beginning to include double beds. The nation's holy, the nation's pompous, the nation's frustrated were sure to react to this drape-suited, gunk-haired southern hick actually doing on television what had been reserved for bedrooms with the light out. React they did, and the ratings went through the roof. For the first time, the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey show eclipsed the Perry Como show. While the talent scouts were suddenly courting Colonel Tom Parker, the controversy flared like a flash fire across the nation. Suddenly young Presley, a kid who still got a kick out of singing gospel songs, was the new threat to American virtue. This shy hillbilly, whose dedication to his mother was legendary, was the most evil thing that had come on the scene since the Charleston. He was immediately dubbed Elvis the Pelvis, a name which nettled Presley. That's about the most stupid thing I have heard from a so-called intelligent adult, he said. The kids loved that kind of talk. He really was theirs. But it didn't quiet the uproar. The Reverend Billy Graham was applauded when he commented that he didn't think Presley was the kind of boy he would like his children. Newspaper articles had experts figure out that the decibel level of Elvis Presley's rock and roll could deafen children. Children in the U.S., Australia and England were expelled from their schools when they refused to lop off their Elvis Presley-style ducktails. Rock and roll dances were banned in several American cities. After a series of riots in which police broke up some rock and roll concerts, and the teenagers gave the cops the worst of the evening, the New York Daily News demanded a midnight curfew for all people under the age of 20. one and suggested that rock and roll dances should be held only under the supervision of selected adults. Elvis Presley's fan mail suddenly shot to 10,000 letters a week. Girls wrote offering themselves to him, outright threatening suicide if he didn't meet them. Some parents threatened homicide if he didn't cool down his act. And this evil had all started in a little white frame church on Adams Street in Tupelo, Mississippi. Red West recalls that, apart from Presley's obvious jubilation at hitting it big, he seemed genuinely disturbed that anyone would regard him as a threat to their daughters, sisters and girlfriends. Heck, said Elvis, I just go the way I feel. There ain't nothing bad about it. I would never do it if I thought it was bad. There is nothing planned in this. It's just music and singing. That's all. His mother would bristle at any suggestion that her son had even the slightest passing acquaintance with vulgarity. My boy wouldn't do anything bad. No such thing. He is a good boy. A boy who has never forgotten his church upbringing, and he hasn't changed one bit. The curious thing was that Gladys was pretty close to the truth. Nevertheless, it seemed impossible to convince half the adult population in the world that Presley was not the devil incarnate. Despite all the screaming crowds and the rioting fans, it was, according to Red West, always hard to believe how successful Presley had become. We never seemed to have time to absorb it all, says Red. We were all busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. We were hitting town after town in very quick succession. About then Elvis really started plowing through the broads. Every town was a different broad. Sometimes one in the afternoon and then one in the night. He was really taking off. He just left streams of gals behind him. And to be honest, there was plenty left over for me and the boys, too. So it was a good fringe benefit. But Red remembers that was about all the benefits there were, because he never had got paid a cent up until that time. There were plenty of deals going down at the time and there was big money coming in. Now, earlier I was there for the ride, but thinking back, for the work I did there should have been some kind of payment because, man, I worked like a dog. All the odd jobs, all that damn driving, anything that nobody else wanted to do, I did. I know that Scotty, Bill and Jay weren't happy about their money setup. I believe in the end they quit because they weren't getting paid what they thought was right. And here is one of the most curious and puzzling things about Elvis. I have seen him give away some of the most incredible gifts imaginable. In later years he was to give away clothes and cars and rings, and even airplanes and houses. But he likes to be in control. Gifts are one thing, money is something else. The point is that I believe somehow he believes money gives a person independence. He doesn't want people to have independence from him. He likes to be a father figure, or a God figure. For many years, with real seriousness, he called us his disciples. He was willing to feed and clothe and give you a good time, but he liked to be in charge of what he gave you when he gave it to you. Somehow he thinks you get enough money together you can pull up sticks and leave him because you don't need him anymore. And, above all, he needs to be needed. It's funny me not getting paid, but Charlie Hodge, one of the best guitar men in the business, wasn't even getting scale salary for musicians for many years. Elvis also doesn't like you to show any independence. That's why there was always that friction he had towards Jerry Schilling. Of all the boys who were called the Memphis Mafia, Jerry had seemed most independent. He didn't accept everything Elvis said without question, and Elvis didn't like it. If you look through most of the boys around him, none of us ever had any real money when we started with him. Me, Sonny, Dave, Joe Esposito, Gene Smith, Jerry Schilling, Lamar Fike, Cliff Cleaves. None of us had bread. We just jumped at the chance to do his bidding and work for him. Good times, bad times, but not much money. It was almost as if it was a requirement to work for him that you had to be broke. You had to need him more than he needed you. Red remembers that just after the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey show, Gene and Julian Aberbach, the two German-born brothers who owned Hill and Range Music Publishing Company and who were to later take over the Elvis Presley Publishing Company, invited Presley and Red to New York's Brown Derby restaurant, which has since gone out of business. Now, there were the two of us, E and me, at the classy Brown Derby. We were fresh out of Memphis, and we both looked like real rednecks, real hicks. I forgot what I had on or what Elvis had on, but the two of us felt about as comfortable as a black at a Ku Klux Klan meeting. Anyway, I made the mistake of going to the bathroom. I went and washed my hands, and this attendant in there did something I had never seen. He passed me a towel and I thought, well, that's a nice gesture and maybe New York is not that bad a town after all. I thanked him and started to leave. The son of a bitch grabbed me and said, how about the tip? I never heard of tipping in a toilet, but this was New York. Well, now I haven't had a dime in my pocket at this time since I can't remember when. I may have just left the biggest TV sensation in the country. I may be having dinner with two big shots, but I ain't had a dime in my pockets for months. Man, I've never been so embarrassed. I just said something about having left my wallet behind. I sat down to dinner and I worried that he was going to come out in front of all those important people and start demanding money for the leak I had in there. I've never been too fond of New York since then, but it gave you an idea of the situation I was in. Although the money for Red was scarce, the dollars were rolling into Presley's account. The first big paychecks were earmarked for something more important. Elvis wanted to buy his mother a home. A real home. It's something she always wanted but never talked about, Presley was to say later. It was as if she didn't want to let anyone know about her dreams, but I knew. I wanted to get my mama a home. He bought an attractive green and white ranch house on Audubon Drive in the outskirts of Memphis, installed a swimming pool, and built a fence around the property to keep out the fans. He also filled the garage up with 2 Cadillacs and a Lincoln limousine. I guess, says Red, the swimming pool was there for show, because Elvis really ain't that keen on swimming. I don't know whether it's because he doesn't like his hair being messed up or he is straight out afraid of the water, but he ain't no big swimmer, no matter what you have seen in the movies. Presley's next offer came from the Steve Allen Show. He appeared with Andy Griffith, Imogene Coca and Steve Allen himself in a skit. Later he sang Hound Dog. Within 24 hours it was on its way to becoming a #1 best seller in the $1 million record bracket. The Ed Sullivan people watched incredulously as Stephen Allen's ratings started to rocket. It was only a matter of time before the Colonel got a call from Sewell Levon. Nobody who was privy to that conversation is talking, but it would be hard to disbelieve that the old Southern horse trader and Colonel Tom Parker did not make the mighty Ed Sullivan toast a little during negotiations for a Presley performance. He is obviously businessman enough to have asked for top dollars, but Colonel Tom is also Southern enough to have reminded the Yankee Sullivan of what he had once said about his boy. Whatever kind of conversation transpired, Presley got $15,000 for a performance, 3 times higher than Ed Sullivan had ever paid anyone. It was indeed a victory for Memphis that night. Only one thing, perhaps, took the edge off it. Presley, and probably the Colonel himself, didn't know it, but the TV cameras were filming Presley only from the waist up. In the end, Sullivan, sensitive to the bomb bursts of criticism and controversy swirling around Presley, was not going to risk getting grilled by his buddies on the New York Times and the Daily News. Red West was, of course, happy that Elvis was mocking it big, but not too pleased about his own situation. It was an exciting life for me, I guess, and maybe I shouldn't have complained. But hell, there was no union for being a professional companion, and I could see myself being that for the rest of my life and not getting paid. Sometimes the hours on the road were really tough. I often used to drive the car on ahead with the band's instruments. Vernon, Elvis's father, had this little bitty trailer cart made, which hooked on the back of my car. It looked more like a rolling toilet than anything else, painted pink and with 1 wheel. The way Elvis's dad went on about that thing, you would have thought it was a goddamned yacht. Anyway, on one of the times when I had to drive from Winston-Salem to Jacksonville, Florida, I was dead on my feet. I was driving like crazy, staying awake on a packet of no-does. A couple of times I almost went off the road. Anyway, outside of Jacksonville, the damn one tire on this portable John trailing behind bursts. Well, I get all the clothes out in the instruments, ditch the stupid-looking trailer, and load them all into the car. I got to Jacksonville about 15 minutes late. It was amazing that I made it at all. Well, when I get there, instead of getting a hero's welcome, Vern Presley is fit to be tied. He wanted to know what had happened to his previous damn rolling toilet of a trailer that probably cost all of $50. He really went on and on about it. I think Elvis probably laughed at the time, but Vernon's reaction to the loss of the portable John nagged at Red. It was just a case of, man, how long could I go busting my chops like this and getting abused into the bargain? Me and Elvis were very close, and I just didn't have the guts to say, hey, don't you think I should get paid a bit for what I'm doing? Now, Elvis was still a decent, good-looking guy who was very easy to get along with. We used to have a lot of fun, and I never saw him pulling any shit with me. But, damn it, I was too embarrassed to ask him for anything. If I had, he would have given it to me. So after this argument with Vernon, which really wasn't an argument, because I was on the receiving end, I thought there had to be a better way. I was getting to the age of having to go into the service. If you enlisted, you could choose your own service. So I thought I would get the service stint over and done with. I told Elvis that I thought I would take off and join the Marines. I don't think Elvis knew that I was joining the Marines really to quit being on the road, and I don't think he thought I'd quit over the Vernon incident. I just didn't want to cause a whole hassle, so I told him I was taking off. It was an emotional thing, and we both shook hands and put our arms around each other. He was a good boy. Red was posted for 18 months in the Mediterranean and later assigned to a Marine base in Virginia. He kept in contact with Presley and, especially, with Gladys, who seemed to have a real maternal concern for Red. So, whenever Red was on leave in Memphis at the same time as Presley, the superstar opened his house in hospitality to Red. Presley continued to insist that friends he could trust be with him all the time. The hype, the publicity, the money, the managers all had their place, but when it came to relaxing and being himself, Presley more and more fell back on his boys, and all the sharp Yankee money in the world and all the tough managers in the world would not change that. If Red's departure left a gap in friendship, it did nothing to stop the incredibly booming career of Presley. When Red and Presley got together on Red's leave, they would marvel at the phenomenon they were witnessing, almost as if they were watching someone else's career and not Presley's. It was still very difficult for a pair of boys from Humes High School, Memphis, to understand what was happening around them. Colonel Tom Parker was in his element. At last he had a property he could promote with every stunt he had learned in the Bible of razzmatazz. Elephants paraded in a conga line for no real reason except that they had Elvis Presley's name emblazoned on their flags. Midgets marched down the streets of Hollywood presenting themselves as the Elvis Presley Midget Fan Club. And then the merchandising hit with a bomb blast. Elvis Presley T-shirts, Elvis Presley jeans, Elvis Presley lipstick, bubble gum, footballs, shirts, socks, sweaters, pajamas, ballpoint pens, diaries. There was no end to it. And all the time in the background was Colonel Tom chuckling his belly, shaking chuckle and showing them all how the old Southern horse trader did things right. Elvis Presley fan clubs sprang up in enormous numbers across the world. At one point there were close to 1 million card-carrying members of various fan clubs who owed their allegiance and love to Presley. Gladys Presley was left a little breathless by it all. She wanted success and money for her boy. But Gladys did her best to make him proud of her, just as he had made her proud of him. She started to go on a weight loss course to make herself look more like a superstar's mama. When it failed, she occasionally took a diet pill. There are some Presley detractors who have been so injudicious as to suggest that Mrs. Presley got into the pills and booze. The notion that this lady allowed herself any excess, other than hard work and overindulgence in her only boy, is quite outlandish. The pressures of being a superstar's mother were indeed taking their toll on Mrs. Presley, and that was compounded by the years of neglect of her own well-being and health. There were times now that she complained of tiredness, something she had never acknowledged as possible before, and she would often have an unhealthy looking color. Her obsessive worry over whether her son was getting enough rest and enough food did not help matters. Presley had collapsed from exhaustion in Jacksonville, Florida, after a marathon night of driving and a hectic, sleepless schedule. Perhaps those first grueling years left an impression on him, for, in his later years, he was to regard sleep with the passion he had once reserved for his inordinately healthy sex life. In 1957, a year after buying the Audubon Drive house, Presley decided it was time to move. One reason might have been that it was too small to answer the needs and style changes of his skyrocketing success. Presley had collected quite an entourage, including uncles and cousins, and the house seemed to be bursting at the seams. Another theory to explain his decision is that the people on Audubon Drive looked down on their new neighbors. Gladys Presley may have settled in a dream house, but the lady was made of fine stuff and she wasn't about to forget her neighbors and old friends in the housing project on Alabama Avenue. Those people were welcome in her new home. There is some suspicion that residents on Audubon Drive had resented the people from the other side of the tracks. Neighbors once formed a committee that offered to buy the Presley house. In any case, whatever the reason, Presley bought a bigger and more expensive house for his mama. It was a 13-acre property in Whitehaven, an upper-class suburb on the outskirts of Memphis. He paid $100,000 for it, a lot of money, considering it was 1957 in Memphis. The house, a converted church, had beautiful white columns at its entrance. Presley named it Graceland, furnished it in purple, white and gold, commissioned figurines of himself with guitar to adorn the gates and installed the mandatory pool. While it might not be the kind of home a stockbroker would buy, it was deluxe class by the tastes of country and Western stars. Meanwhile, Hal Wallace, the genial and genius movie producer, had been talking turkey to Colonel Tom. A picture deal was signed for Presley to star in 3 movies. Presley was ecstatic, a reaction that would not last as the years and the scripts wore on. No Presley movie ever lost money. Richard Burton, Laurence Olivier, Marlon Brando, Frank Sinatra, none of them could go anywhere near the earning power of Presley when it came to the box office. And yet, in the years to come, Presley would grow bitter. Red remembers, he would sometimes see himself in a movie and he would get disgusted. He would say, "Who is that fast talking hillbilly son of a bitch that nobody can understand?" One day he is singing to a dog, then to a car, then to a cow. They are all the damned same movies with that southerner just singing to something different. The first movie, Love Me Tender, started shooting in April 1957. It started a package trend that made a fortune for Presley, the Colonel, the producers and RCA Victor. The package was the essence of simplicity. Churn out low budget movies with predictable blank spaces for Presley to sing to his dogs, his children, his cars or his cows. Then release an album of songs from the movie track. Good packaging, good business, but not the stuff that Oscar-winning movies are made of. During the making of Love Me Tender, as Presley was to later tell Red, he developed an uncontrollable crush on his female lead, Deborah Paget. Presley talked to Red about it at the time. If you look at her in those earlier pictures, says Sonny, you will see she had a decided likeness to Priscilla Presley, whom he was soon to meet. She had black hair. When Elvis first met Priscilla, he got her to dye her hair black. I think it's significant that his mother had black hair, too. Elvis in real life has very light hair. In that movie you can see he is almost blonde. Later on he dyed his hair black, too. Of course, now, when he hasn't had a dye job done on time, his sideburns are almost completely white, like his daddy's. Both Red and Sonny West recall that despite the handsome young Presley's shy attraction for Deborah Paget, his passion was not returned. I guess the way it went, says Sonny, was that Deborah really thought Elvis was just a nice handsome kid. She wasn't the least bit interested in him. So true. At that time, she was dating the fabled Howard Hughes. In 1957, Presley's third movie, Jailhouse Rock, marked the first of the gradual changes in his personality. They were changes that would bring him endless hours of suffering. The movie starred Presley in the part of Vince, a young man who goes to prison after accidentally killing a drunk in a brawl. There he meets his cellmate, Hunk Houghton, who is a one-time Western singer. After a jailhouse concert shows Hunk how much talent his young cellmate has, he signs him to a long-term contract, which is promptly forgotten, until they both meet on the street as free men. By that time, Vince has made it big, but with fame and stardom has come the inevitable star complex. Honoring the contract, Vince takes Hunk on as a manservant and dog walker. Vince meets a record plugger, Peggy Van Alden, who falls in love with the brooding, tough guy superstar from the wrong side of the tracks. Together she and Hunk try to turn his head around from being a spoiled, selfish brat who wants everything done on his command. It ends happily, with Vince seeing the error of his ways. In real life, says Red West, Elvis became Vince. Now, I don't mean he was selfish and big-headed all the time, but he took to fits of anger that none of us had ever seen before. He wanted to be treated as something special. Of course, he was something special, but he had never demanded that special attention. He was always one of the boys. He would often share the driving on long gigs. We had shared everything, even our women. It was at this time that a young, star-struck fan by the name of Lamar Fike came on the scene. The way I remember it, says Sonny West, he climbed over the wall at Elvis's house in Audubon Drive and he never left. He still is with Elvis today. Lamar is 300 pounds in weight and Elvis used to make him the butt of all his jokes. I'm not saying Elvis didn't like him. He really does. But when he speaks to Lamar it will always be get your fat ass out of here or get your fat ass in here and take care of this. Lamar, I guess, deep down is a very sensitive guy. I know he was sensitive about his weight, but he never let it show. He was the clown of the outfit. He was also the amateur psychiatrist. He would analyze everyone and everything. I really got to love Lamar. He is one of those jolly, funny and sensitive kind of guys you can't help love. But with Elvis, Lamar was always the butt of jokes. Presley went on acting exactly like the character in Jailhouse Rock. Recalls Sonny, he got to smoking those stubby little cigars and if nobody didn't light it for him straight away, he would sit there and he would seethe. Then finally he would blow up and yell, am I going to sit here all day with this motherfucker in mouth with nobody lighting it for me? If I am, then you can all get your asses out of here. It would be the same. Sonny goes on. With a simple glass of water, the glass would be in front of him. He would stay quiet and then yell, am I going to die of thirst or is some son of a bitch going to pour some water for me? It was a dramatic change from the gentle southern boy who was apprehensive about Sonny West because he swore too much. Sonny relates, at first, man, we would only see flashes of those rages, but later on it was terrible. He would go into rages when things didn't go his way. He would wreck a goddamn roof or fire his guns off like a madman. There were times when he would assemble his disciples or his boys, or his Memphis Mafia, whatever one wants to call them, and he would say, I'm in charge here and if anyone wants to say different, then I may get hurt but somebody is going to die. When Presley started to take his special medication, he was like an unexploded bomb, says Red. You could talk to him quiet, sensibly, about something and maybe that night you would say something that didn't quite go along with his way of thinking or doing things. But he would talk calmly about it and sort of see your way of looking at something. Then he would go to bed and get out of it on his so-called medicine. And the next day, man, wow, he would stew on something all night and then it would work up inside of him and he would lose total reason and just explode. On those days you would try to keep out of his way. Sonny recalls, When Elvis got into those rages and took it out on Red, it would bring the worst out in Red. I would see Red sitting there trying to control himself for something said to him that was very unfair. Then he would go outside and get in a fight just to let off the steam. He could always bring the worst out in Red. By the beginning of 1958, as Presley's career set record after record, the scene was set for the tragedy that would mark his life and change it. He was about to lose the person he loved most in the world.